Hello and welcome to Ideagen TV's Acceleration 2030 Summit. Today, we are thrilled and honored to be joined by the Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership at AARP, Jean Accius. Jean, welcome.
Well, Christian, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be part of this conversation.
It's so great to have you, Jean. It's been a while since we've had you on Ideagen TV, so it's great to have you back for the Acceleration Summit. And to kick off the interview, Jean, can you just briefly describe yourself and your roles and responsibilities at AARP for our global audience?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. We look and we're always excited to be part of these important global conversations. Gene Axious, I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership, as you indicated earlier, Christian. I get the great pleasure of leading and helping to position our organization as a global thought leader, really thinking about what are the opportunities to work across the globe to change how the world sees and values aging. If you think about it, in the United States, we have about 10,000 people who are turning 65 each and every day. In China, we are seeing 54,000 people turning 60 each and every day. And around the world, 200,000 people are turning 60 each and every day. So we know that not only is the population is aging, that it's a global trend that we're seeing across the world, that in addition to the fact that they're aging, they're also in many cases living longer. And as a result of that, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity to engage and think about what are those solutions that we need to put in place in order to ensure that people can live a stronger, more productive, healthy life as they age.
That's absolutely right, Gene. And diving into the interview, so in your opinion, what does a unified front of the public and private sector look like to provide individuals with the tools that they will need as they get older to sustain a more purposeful and satisfying life?
That is a great question, and that is part of what AARP is doing. We believe that we want to be a wise friend and a fierce defender, particularly as people transition across the life stages. And what I mean by that is the fact that we know that people either want to or need to continue working, for example. And we know that many companies are managing a multi-generational workforce, 5 generations at any point in time. And as a result of that, we have done some tremendous work in partnerships with the World Economic Forum and OECD to really look at the value of age diversity, which is critically important as we have these broader conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, to also to account for age. And what we have found through this work with the World Economic Forum and OECD is that companies who are more age diverse, they tend to be more productive, have higher revenue, there's greater stability for those companies, and there's also tremendous productivity and innovation taking place. And think about it. You have the opportunity for generations to come together with different perspectives, different lived experiences around creating solutions for a diverse consumer base, a diverse population. So when we think about public and private sector opportunities, what we need to really think about is that given the aging of the demographics, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, this is a demographic that's going to impact all sectors and industries. And the question that leaders across these sectors need to account for is the fundamental question is, what is your longevity agenda? What is your longevity plan? And if you're in the private sector, the question is, how are you going to remain relevant if you do not account for, co-create solutions with an older population, that whether that is your workforce or whether that is the consumers that you serve. And we know that any company who does not take into account the consumer experience will not be there long term. And I think that from a private sector standpoint, we need to think about what are the opportunities to tap into the wisdom, the lived experiences, the contributions of the older adult population. At AARP, we have actually quantified the longevity market. And what we found was the fact that in 2018, people over the age of 50 in the United States spent over $8.3 trillion of economic activity. Another way to think about that, Christian, is that for every dollar spent in the United States in 2018, 56 cents of every dollar was spent by someone over the age of 50. And that by 2050, that will go from 56 cents of every dollar in 2018 to 62 cents of every dollar by 2050. Now, for all of those who are watching, I think it's important to note that the aging demographics is not a monolithic group. And you just heard me indicate 2018 and 2050. Well, millennials start turning 50, get ready for this, Christian, in 2031. Right? So we're accounting for that because people are aging. So that is the important thing, is that whether you're a leader in the public sector or the private sectors, how are you accounting for taking the needs of co-creating solutions with a population that's growing and living much longer? And by the way, living nonlinear lives. We know so many adults, older adults, who are going back to school, who are doing different careers, who are contributing, whether it's volunteerism, giving back in terms of charitable donations, or caregiving. So we really have an opportunity, particularly post-COVID, or as we're going through the pandemic, to really reimagine, reprioritize what our systems and our societies look like, with the goal of ensuring that we're creating livable and healthier societies that will benefit all populations.
That, those stats that you mentioned were unbelievable. And I'm still kind of caught up because it took me by surprise, but you said that companies that have multi-generations within them, working within them, are being more productive. And, I'm sitting here thinking, that's interesting, because I feel like with the difference in age and generations, that there would be more of a learning curve for either the people starting in the company, or the older experienced workers that are already there. I feel like there would be some sort of learning curve, if you will. But the fact that they're being more productive is actually incredible, and it's great to see, rather than the older generations being more so pushed away, if you will.
I was just gonna quickly say that there is a cost to age discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And age discrimination it happens across the age group, right? There have been many times where someone would say to me, "Where do you work?" And I say, "Well, I work at AARP." And the response is, "Well, aren't you too young to be working at AARP?" I actually had a policymaker say that to me before. She actually started laughing. She thought I was joking. And I seriously said, "No, I work at AARP." But you also hear it, whether you are, you're too young to manage a team. Well, what does that really mean? Or
Right.
You're too old to do this. So I do think part of what we have been doing as an organization, which I think is critically important for all sectors and all industries, is to evaluate the stereotypes, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that we're labeling and constraining people. And as an organization, the way people are aging today is drastically different than the way they've aged in the past.
Right.
And I do think that that's critically important. So as we think about co-creating solutions, it's critically important to really ensure that people across all life stages and ages are part of that process.
That's right. That's incredible. And we, from Ideagen, we definitely applaud the work that you and AARP are doing. And, you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic in your previous response. So I wanted to run off that and touch on that a little bit, because the past year and a half has been consumed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm curious, Gene, do you believe that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the reduced face-to-face time experienced by those that are over 50 increase their technology rate of adoption, and in what way and why?
Right. So I absolutely love this question, Christian, and I think it's multi-pronged. And what I mean by that is the fact that one of the things that we saw, particularly through the pandemic, and continue to see very clearly, is the fact that older adults are nimble. Older adults know how to pivot. And if you think about it, rightly so, they have lived through so many different life events and have a resilience factor as a result of having gone through, as my family would say, life. And what we've seen is the fact that this stereotype pre-COVID was the fact that, well, older adults don't know how to use technology, or they might have some challenges with technology. And what the pandemic actually showed was the fact that that's not necessarily the case. Older adults were on Zoom, they were on TikTok, they were on social media, they were FaceTiming, and they were adapting quite easily to technology. So this idea that older adults are fearful of technology is actually not the case. And in fact, we have done some survey work that illustrates that older adults are using technology at significant rates comparable to other populations. So I think that is one great headline. I also think that what the pandemic has also demonstrated is the systemic inequities that has only been exacerbated as a result of COVID. And what I mean by that is the fact that not just for older person, but for all generations, when you look at, let's say, the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around poverty and hunger, for instance, or Goal 5, for example, in terms of gender, in terms of abuse of women, we've seen significant challenges. And another area that I would just mention related to the point that you just raised around technology is the growing digital divide. So as the world went online, the United Nations reports that half the world's population was offline. So think about that. As we shifted as a result of the pandemic to utilizing more technology because of physical distance requirements and being quarantined. So as the world went online, according to the United Nations report, nearly half of the world's population was offline. So we really have to address the digital divide across the globe, because addressing that would mean that there would be greater access to social connections. We know that social connection is related to well-being and overall health. If you think about what we've had to do, particularly in the US, in terms of the drastic increase in telehealth and telemedicine, that's not possible if you don't have access to technology and broadband.
Right.
So on one hand, I do think it's critically important to acknowledge the fact that through this pandemic, we have clearly seen that older adults are not just resilient, but they're actually able to utilize what we've already known and have been sharing for many, many years as an organization, their comfort level and ease of use with regards to technology. But at the same time, we do, as a collective global community, need to address the issues of the digital divide and ensuring that access is a right and not a privilege.
You're absolutely right, and you're right. Over the course of this pandemic, personally, I have seen older, experienced workers, or people over 50 on TikTok, on these newer social medias, with a presence, may I add, as well. But you're right, we need to work on closing that digital divide, and a lot of the reason there is that gap is because of these stereotypes of the older generation. Why are they on Facebook? Why are they on social media? So I think, one of the key ways of closing the gap is breaking these stereotypes. Mm-hmm. Now, Gene, my question for you is, how do you think the social stereotypes on technology and the capability surrounding seniors and those over 50, how can it be broken?
So there's a couple of ways I think this will happen. As I mentioned to you, let's just use some of the numbers that we know, particularly in the United States. As I indicated, people over the age of 50 are significant consumers, both in terms of contributing to the broader economy, which has a ripple effect in terms of jobs, in terms of tax revenue, in terms of supporting their families, as well as supporting their communities. So when I mentioned the $8.3 trillion in 2018, when you think about technology, for example, what we know is the fact that older adults, people over the age of 50, particularly in the United States, spent over $140 billion solely just on technology in 2018. And that by 2050, that would be over $640 billion.
Wow.
So I think that just from an economic standpoint, again, given the aging and the demographics, given the ease of use, that this is a wake-up call for private industry. I also think that as we look at the direct and indirect costs that's been associated with the systemic disparities that we see as relates to the digital divide, that we cannot afford to go back to pre-COVID normal,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Meaning the fact that we have to address the digital divide because we know and we have seen that there are not health benefits, that there is a range of benefits to ensuring that people are connected. And in the absence of that connection, there's a cost for that. So I do think that both from a public and private sector perspective, that as we start to reimagine what our societies will look like in order to ensure that our societies are healthy and productive, that we have to address what is the role of technology and how do we close the gap, the opportunity gap that exists, frankly, across the world in a way that meet the needs of the populations that we serve. And I think that any country that wants to be competitive in the future as part of their plan has to account for the aging demographics and also has to account for the needs of technology. I do not think, Christian, this is something that any sector or any industry or any country, frankly, can ignore.
Mhm. Right. And to your point, the pandemic hit and everyone had to adapt quickly, and there were hiccups and bumps along the way, but as we start to slowly emerge from the pandemic, I agree. I don't think that we can go back to that normal that it was before the pandemic. I think that at least in the workforce, that things have progressed at a much quicker rate, and that it's only going to be moving faster in that direction. So you're right. I don't think that we can, in a way, backtrack to what we were at. We just need to keep pushing forward, and I think that with that, it'll be easier to close that gap. And that actually is a great transition into my next question. So you had stated, and AARP estimates that with the growing older population, the 50 plus economic output will triple by 2050. Triple. How do you think this growing population and economic giant can work together with the UN on achieving the global goals by 2030? As you know, here at Ideagen, we work to create awareness and ultimately achieve the global goals. And we are on the runway. We have 9 years left to achieve these massive goals. So Gene, what do you how do you believe that they can work together?
Well, I really appreciate that question. AARP has a consultative status with the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs. And through our international office, particularly in New York, we engage with the United Nations and the global partners, including our member states, private agencies, private sector, international NGOs, academics, and things to advocate on the issues, particularly pertaining to the older persons. And in fact, through our engagements and our partnerships with international partners, we were extremely successful in ensuring that older adults and older persons were included, not as a separate goal, but throughout all of the 17 goals. And to ensure that there was language and a focus on life course, because that's critically important. Lifelong learning, life course, all ages were included into that. I do think that, to your point, last year, pre-COVID, as we talked about the multi-generational workforce, we were able to partner with the United Nations and to do what we refer to as a United Nations briefing, which is something that we do on an annual basis. And for those who are watching, they can actually visit us at AARP International, and you'll see and get an opportunity to view the United Nations event that we hosted last year. And the focus was actually looking at the future of work and really fostering a multi-generational workforce, given the aging of the population, given the many of the statistics, the data that we just talked about, Christian. And it was really impactful because this was a conversation that brought together public sector leaders, member states, and also private sector leaders. We had the UN General Assembly President to keynote this major briefing on the future of work and longevity and the aging of the population, which was the first time that has actually happened. We also had leaders involved and engage with member states, ambassadors to talk about the strategies that we need to be thinking about in terms of the workforce of the future. And that also relates to one of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around workforce, because we also understand the critical need, governments understand the critical need, and private sector understand the critical need to not just ensure that the workforce is a place that is multi-generational, where it's not only benefiting the workers, but also the bottom line, but also the workplace has the right ecosystem that fosters the age diversity that's needed and that also reflects the changing demographics of the consumer base. So that's just one example where we believe that through working with the United Nations, through working with partners like Ideagen, through working with private sector leaders, that we can coalesce around a shared agenda, and the SDGs is just is a shared agenda and a goal and a set of goals for us to really think about how do we accelerate. And unfortunately, in some cases, we do have to acknowledge that the pandemic has either stalled or pushed us back. So that means that we have to really double down on our efforts. And in order to double down on those efforts, it's going to require a multi-sectorial global collaboration with traditional and as well as untraditional partners to meet the goals by 2030.
That's right, Gene. And it is such a relief, being at a company like Ideagen that works towards creating awareness and achieving the goals, to be partnered with an organization as AARP that is so aware and willing to also create that awareness and work towards achieving those goals. You're absolutely right. The pandemic has stalled progress on a lot of the goals, if not all. I mean, education, good health and well-being, those are just two of the obvious ones that it stalled. So it's wonderful to hear that the work that you all are doing is really pushing towards those achievement of the goals. Gene, I want to thank you on behalf of Ideagen for joining us today on Ideagen TV as part of the Ideagen Acceleration Summit. Jean Accius, Senior Vice President for AARP's Global Thought Leadership. Gene, my final question for you is, what is your call to action as we continue to build a more sustainable world?
Well, I think it's actually very aligned with this summit. We need to accelerate our progress. We need to accelerate the opportunities to look at the changing demographics and co-create solutions in a way that ensures that their needs are reflected, that they are adding value because they want to do that, that we are challenging the assumptions, whether it's in policy, whether it's in product development for the consumers or the residents that we serve, and how do we ensure that people have the opportunity to live a longer, healthier, more productive life, and how do we create that right ecosystem, the right society attributes that would allow every single person, regardless of age, gender, disability status, sexual orientation, to live their healthiest, most productive life. If we can do that, if we can achieve that, if we can look at where we are with the SDGs and come up with a plan to accelerate, which is why I love the theme of this summit, then I think that by working collaboratively across the sectors and having a global framework to do that will allow us to achieve those goals at a much more intentional and strategic way, where we create a new normal.
Gene Axious, Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership at AARP. Thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of the Ideagen Acceleration Summit. And we look forward to continuing this conversation during the 17 days of sustainability. Thank you very much, Gene.
Thank you so much, Christian.